I stood frozen in the marble lobby of Millennium Tower, watching a little girl with dirt-smudged cheeks press her small face against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her breath fogged the glass as she stared up at the Chicago skyline, completely mesmerized by the city lights that twinkled like stars beneath the evening sky. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What stopped me cold wasn't her presence in this exclusive building where security rarely allowed anyone without an appointment past the front desk. It was what she whispered to her reflection in that glass, words so soft I almost missed them, but once I heard them, they carved themselves into my memory forever. I wish I had a daddy who could see the lights with me. The security guard was already approaching her, his hand reaching for his radio to call for backup. In my world of corporate mergers and billion-dollar acquisitions, I'd grown accustomed to making split-second decisions that affected thousands of jobs and millions in revenue. But nothing had prepared me for the choice I made in that moment when I stepped forward and said, "She's with me." The guard's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion as he recognized my face from the magazine covers and business journals that decorated the lobby walls. Jude Harrison, founder and CEO of Harrison Technologies, the man Forbes had dubbed the most eligible bachelor in Chicago, was claiming responsibility for a child who clearly didn't belong in this world of marble floors and designer suits. I knelt down to her level, my $1,000 suit jacket touching the polished floor as I met her eyes. They were the color of warm honey, filled with an innocence that reminded me of someone I'd spent years trying to forget. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophia," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient sounds of the busy lobby. "I'm looking for my papa. He's working late again, and I got scared waiting outside." Before I could ask more questions, the elevator doors chimed open, and a man burst through them, his face flushed with panic and exhaustion. He wore the uniform of Rose's Diner, the 24-hour restaurant on the ground floor of my building that I'd passed countless times but never entered. His eyes frantically searched the lobby until they landed on Sophia, and the relief that washed over his features was so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Sophia! Baby, you can't just wander off like that. I told you to wait at the counter with Maria." He rushed toward us, his work boots echoing against the marble as he gathered the little girl into his arms. It was only then that he seemed to notice me, still kneeling on the floor in my expensive suit, and his expression shifted to mortification. "I'm so sorry, sir. She didn't mean any trouble. I work downstairs and my babysitter got sick, so I had to bring her with me tonight. She must have gotten curious about the building and—" His words tumbled over each other as he tried to explain, clearly recognizing who I was and understanding the potential implications of his daughter bothering one of the building's most important tenants. The exhaustion in his voice told a story I recognized all too well, even though our circumstances couldn't have been more different. Marcus Rodriguez worked 3 jobs to support his daughter, picking up dishwashing shifts at Rose's Diner when his day job at the auto repair shop ended, and his weekend work doing landscaping didn't pay enough to cover their small apartment in Pilsen. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that every dollar mattered, every hour counted, and every sacrifice was worth it if it meant giving his daughter a better life than the one he'd known growing up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I watched him with Sophia, the way his calloused hands gently smoothed her dark hair, the way his tired eyes softened when he looked at her, and something shifted inside my chest. For the past 15 years, I'd built walls around my heart so high that even I couldn't see over them anymore. Success had become my only language, profit margins my only poetry, and solitude my only companion. The penthouse apartment 40 floors above us was a testament to everything I'd achieved, and everything I'd lost along the way. "It's no trouble at all," I heard myself saying, surprising even myself with the gentleness in my voice. "I was just telling Sophia about the view from up here. Would you like to see it too?" Marcus's eyes widened with uncertainty, clearly torn between polite refusal and his daughter's obvious curiosity about the world beyond their neighborhood. Sophia looked up at her father with pleading eyes, and I could see the exact moment when his parental instincts to give her every possible experience won over his discomfort with accepting charity from a stranger. "If you're sure it's not an imposition, Mr. Harrison," he said quietly, having read my name from the building directory countless times during his late shifts downstairs. As we rode the elevator to the top floor, I found myself studying their reflection in the polished steel doors. Sophia stood between us, her small hand in her father's weathered one, and for the first time in years I wondered what it would feel like to be part of something real, something that mattered beyond quarterly reports and stock prices. I had no way of knowing that this chance encounter would unravel everything I thought I knew about success, family, and the price of the choices we make when we're too young to understand their consequences. The elevator climbed silently through the floors of Millennium Tower, each number lighting up like a countdown to something I couldn't quite name. Sophia pressed herself against the glass wall of the elevator, watching the city shrink below us as we ascended. Her breath created small circles of fog on the pristine surface, and she used her finger to draw what looked like a heart before the condensation disappeared. "Papa, look how small the cars look," she whispered, tugging on Marcus's sleeve. Her voice carried a wonder that I'd forgotten existed, the kind of pure amazement that came from seeing the world without the cynicism that success had taught me to wear like armor. Marcus smiled down at his daughter, but I caught the way his jaw tightened as he took in the elevator's opulent interior. The mahogany panels, the crystal fixtures, the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers. Everything designed to remind visitors of the wealth and power that resided in this building. I'd ridden this same elevator thousands of times without giving any of it a second thought, but seeing it through their eyes made me acutely aware of how foreign this world must feel to them. When we reached the 42nd floor, the doors opened directly into my penthouse apartment. Sophia's gasp echoed in the marble foyer as she took in the soaring ceilings, the modern art that hung on walls painted in colors that had been specifically chosen by an interior designer whose hourly rate exceeded what most people made in a month. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago that real estate agents like to call priceless, though I knew exactly what it had cost me. "Welcome to my home," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. When was the last time I'd referred to this place as home instead of simply my residence or my property? When was the last time I'd brought anyone here who wasn't a business associate or someone trying to get something from me? Sophia moved through the space like a small explorer discovering a new continent. She stopped in front of a sculpture that had been featured in Architectural Digest, tilting her head to study it from different angles. "It looks like a bird trying to fly, but its wings are stuck," she observed, and I realized she'd captured something about the piece that the art critic's glowing review had completely missed. Marcus followed behind her, his eyes taking in details that most visitors missed entirely. While others were impressed by the obvious displays of wealth, he noticed the things that revealed the person who lived here. The kitchen that was clearly never used for actual cooking, equipped with restaurant-grade appliances that existed purely for show. The dining room table that could seat 12 but showed no signs of ever hosting a meal. The living room with its perfectly arranged furniture that looked like a magazine spread rather than a place where someone actually lived. "You have a beautiful home, Mr. Harrison," Marcus said, and I could hear the careful politeness in his voice. He was trying to be gracious, but I caught the slight question in his tone. It was the voice of someone wondering how a person could live surrounded by so much luxury, yet leave it feeling so empty. Sophia had wandered over to the grand piano that sat in the corner of the living room, its black lacquer surface reflecting the city lights like a mirror. She reached up tentatively to touch one of the keys, producing a single clear note that rang through the silence of the apartment. "Do you play?" I asked, moving to stand beside her. She shook her head, but her eyes remained fixed on the keys. "My mama used to sing to me," she said softly. "Papa says she had the most beautiful voice in the whole world, like an angel. Sometimes I try to remember her songs, but they get fuzzy in my head." The simplicity of her words hit me harder than any business negotiation ever had. I knelt down beside her, my fingers finding the keys almost automatically. I'd learned to play as a child, back when my mother still believed that cultural refinement might somehow compensate for my father's absence. The lessons had continued through prep school and college, more as a social expectation than genuine interest, but muscle memory is a strange thing. I played a simple melody, something soft and gentle that seemed to match the evening mood. Sophia's eyes widened with delight, and she clapped her small hands together. "That's so pretty. Can you teach me?" Before I could answer, she was climbing onto the bench beside me, her small fingers reaching for the keys with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. I showed her how to position her hands, how to find middle C, how to press the keys with just enough pressure to create sound without force. Marcus watched from across the room, and I could see something shifting in his expression. The polite wariness was being replaced by something warmer, more genuine. "She's always been drawn to music," he said, moving closer. "At home, she'll sit for hours with this old radio I fixed up, just listening. She can pick out melodies on this little keyboard. I bought her at a garage sale, but I never thought about actual lessons." His voice trailed off, and I understood the weight behind those unfinished words. Piano lessons weren't a luxury that fit into a budget stretched between rent, groceries, and the constant worry of making ends meet. They belonged to a world of privilege that felt as distant as the stars visible through my windows. "Music is universal," I said, helping Sophia find the right keys for a simple scale. "It doesn't care about where you come from or what you have. It just asks you to listen." As Sophia experimented with the keys, creating her own melody through trial and error, I found myself remembering things I'd buried for years. My own childhood lessons, the way music had been one of the few things that brought me genuine joy before life, taught me that joy was a luxury I couldn't afford. The way my mother's face would light up when I played for her, back when she still had hopes for what our family might become. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't take offense. Why are you being so kind to us? In my experience, people like you, well, they don't usually invite people like me into their homes." The question was fair, direct, and completely reasonable. It was also impossible to answer honestly without revealing truths I'd spent 15 years avoiding. How could I explain that watching him with his daughter had awakened something in me that I'd thought was permanently buried? How could I tell him that Sophia's innocent wish for a father had cut through every defense I'd built around my heart? "Maybe I'm tired of living in a beautiful cage," I said finally, the words surprising me with their honesty. "Maybe I forgot that there were people in the world who value things that can't be bought or sold." Sophia looked up from the piano keys, her honey-colored eyes serious beyond her years. "Papa says that the best things in life don't cost any money, like hugs and bedtime stories and watching the sunset. Is that true?" I met her gaze, this 6-year-old philosopher who'd somehow managed to articulate something that all my education and business experience had failed to teach me. "I'm beginning to think your papa is a very wise man." The evening stretched on longer than any of us had expected. Sophia fell asleep, curled up on my couch, her small hand still resting on the piano keys she'd been experimenting with. Marcus and I found ourselves talking in the kitchen, sharing coffee and conversation that felt more real than any interaction I'd had in months. He told me about working multiple jobs to support Sophia, about the dreams he'd set aside to focus on being the father she needed, about the loneliness of single parenthood and the weight of being everything to someone so small and dependent. His honesty was refreshing in a world where everyone I met had an agenda, where every conversation was a negotiation and every relationship was transactional. In return, I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone. About the emptiness that success had brought, about the price of climbing so high that everyone below looked like ants, about the way my penthouse felt more like a monument to isolation than achievement. "You know what the funny thing is?" Marcus said, glancing over at his sleeping daughter. "She asked me yesterday why some kids have daddies who come to school events and others don't. I tried to explain that some families are different, that having one parent who loves you is enough, but I could see in her eyes that she was wondering what was wrong with us, why we weren't complete like other families." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with the kind of parental guilt that no amount of money could ease. I thought about my own childhood, about the father who'd chosen his career over his family, about the way absence could shape a child just as profoundly as presence. "She doesn't know how lucky she is to have you," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. As Marcus gathered his sleeping daughter to carry her home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The reluctance to see someone leave. My apartment would return to its pristine silence, my life to its profitable predictability. But something had shifted tonight that couldn't be undone. "Thank you for this evening, Mr. Harrison," Marcus said at the elevator. Sophia will remember this forever. I watched the elevator doors close on them, taking away the first genuine warmth my home had felt in years. Standing alone in my marble foyer, surrounded by all the trappings of success, I realized that I'd just experienced something more valuable than any acquisition, any merger, any financial victory I'd ever achieved. For the first time in 15 years, I'd remembered what it felt like to be part of something real. The following weeks passed in a blur of unexpected encounters that began to reshape the rigid structure of my carefully ordered life. I found myself taking lunch breaks for the first time in years, not in the executive dining room with its crisp white tablecloths and hushed conversations about market fluctuations, but downstairs at Rosa's diner, where the coffee was strong, the portions were generous, and Sophia would wave at me from behind the counter where she did her homework while Marcus worked his evening shift. Rosa Martinez, the diner's owner, was a woman in her 60s who treated everyone like family whether they ordered a cup of coffee or the daily special. She'd watch Sophia with the practiced eye of someone who'd raised 5 children of her own, making sure the little girl had snacks between meals and help with her math problems when Marcus was busy with customers. The diner had become Sophia's second home, a place where she was safe and loved while her father worked to keep their small world afloat. I began timing my visits to coincide with Sophia's presence, drawn by her infectious curiosity about everything from the way the espresso machine created foam to the stories behind the faded photographs that decorated the diner's walls. She would save her questions for me, as if somehow sensing that I needed to remember how to see the world through fresh eyes. "Mr. Jude," she said one afternoon, using the informal name she'd insisted on despite Marcus's gentle corrections about proper respect for important people. "Why do you always eat alone? Don't you have a family to go home to?" The question came with the directness that only children possess, cutting through social conventions straight to the heart of things adults spend their lives learning to avoid discussing. Marcus looked up from wiping down tables, ready to apologize for his daughter's bluntness, but I held up a hand to stop him. "That's a very good question, Sophia," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "I suppose I got so busy with work that I forgot how important it is to have people to share meals with." She considered this with the seriousness that she brought to all complex problems. "Papa says that eating together is how families show they love each other. Maybe you could eat with us sometimes?" The invitation was offered with such genuine warmth that it took me a moment to find my voice. When was the last time someone had wanted my company for reasons that had nothing to do with my net worth or business connections? When was the last time I'd been invited somewhere simply because someone enjoyed having me around? "I would like that very much," I said, and meant it more than any contract I'd ever signed. These dinner invitations led to weekend visits to their small apartment in Pilsen, a neighborhood that existed in sharp contrast to the gleaming towers of downtown Chicago. The buildings here told stories of working families, of immigrants who'd come seeking better lives, of communities that supported each other through hard times and celebrated together during good ones. Sophia would take my hand and lead me through streets where children played soccer in vacant lots, and grandmothers sat on stoops watching the world go by with patient wisdom. Their apartment occupied the second floor of a 3-story building that had seen better decades but maintained its dignity through Marcus's careful maintenance and Sophia's artistic touches. The walls were covered with her drawings, colorful masterpieces that depicted their life together with the honest beauty that only a child's perspective could capture. There was Marcus teaching her to ride a bicycle, both of them laughing. There was Rosa's diner with all its customers drawn as smiling stick figures. And there, in a place of honor above the small television, was a drawing of the 3 of us at my piano, Sophia's interpretation of our first meeting rendered in crayons and pure joy. The apartment was small enough that I could see the entire living space from the front door, but it contained more warmth and genuine happiness than my sprawling penthouse had ever held. Marcus had furnished it with second-hand pieces that he'd restored himself, each item chosen for function rather than fashion, but arranged with care that spoke of someone who understood the difference between a house and a home. Sophia's bedroom was a testament to her father's devotion, painted in soft lavender with glow-in-the-dark stars arranged on the ceiling in actual constellation patterns that Marcus had researched and carefully positioned. Her bed was covered with stuffed animals collected from garage sales and clearance racks, each one named and treasured. A small bookshelf held picture books and early readers, many showing the wear that came from being loved rather than simply owned. It was during one of these visits that I learned about the music lessons I'd been secretly providing. Marcus had mentioned casually that Sophia was showing remarkable progress with a new piano teacher, someone who was working with her twice a week after school. When I expressed interest in hearing about her lessons, Sophia's face lit up with excitement. "Miss Catherine is the best teacher in the whole world," she announced, launching into a detailed description of scales and finger exercises that sounded far more advanced than I'd expected. "She says I have natural rhythm and that music is like a language I already know how to speak." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest as I listened to her enthusiasm, knowing that I was playing a small part in nurturing something that brought her such joy. The anonymous payments to the Music Academy, arranged through my assistant and presented to Marcus as a scholarship for exceptional students, had been my way of giving Sophia opportunities without creating the kind of obligation that might make Marcus uncomfortable. But my carefully constructed secret was about to unravel in the most public and humiliating way possible. The annual Harrison Technologies board meeting was held in the company's executive conference room 40 floors above the city streets where real life happened. The mahogany table could seat 20, though only 12 board members actually attended these quarterly gatherings where we discussed profit margins, expansion plans, and strategic acquisitions with the detached efficiency that characterized all our business dealings. Richard Blackstone, the board's longest-serving member and my most persistent critic, had requested that this meeting include a discussion of what he termed executive image management. I should have seen the warning signs in his choice of words, in the way his assistant had been asking seemingly casual questions about my schedule and whereabouts, but I'd been too distracted by thoughts of Sophia's upcoming school performance to pay attention to corporate politics. The meeting began with the usual financial reports and market analyses, discussions of quarterly earnings that showed Harrison Technologies continuing to outperform projections across all sectors. Our mobile app development division had secured 3 major contracts, our cloud computing services were expanding into international markets, and our artificial intelligence research was generating patent applications that would pay dividends for years to come. I presented these successes with the practiced confidence that had made me one of the youngest billionaires in Chicago's history, fielding questions about expansion timelines and resource allocation, with the expertise that 15 years of business leadership had taught me. Everything was proceeding exactly as it had in dozens of previous meetings until Blackstone cleared his throat and announced that he had concerns about recent developments that could impact the company's reputation. "It's come to my attention," he said, his voice carrying the kind of false regret that preceded calculated attacks, "that our CEO has been spending considerable time in establishments and neighborhoods that might raise questions about his judgment and the company's image." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the other board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. I felt my jaw clench as I realized where this conversation was heading, understanding too late that my private life had become a matter of corporate scrutiny. Blackstone continued with the methodical precision of someone who had planned this moment carefully. "He'd had me followed," he revealed, producing photographs that showed me entering Rosa's diner, visiting Marcus and Sophia's apartment building, even walking through Pilsen's streets with Sophia's small hand in mine. The images were presented like evidence in a criminal trial, each one accompanied by commentary about how they might be perceived by shareholders, clients, and the media. "The question we must ask ourselves," Blackstone said, his eyes meeting mine across the polished table, "is whether these associations are compatible with Harrison Technologies' brand identity. Our clients expect a certain level of sophistication from their business partners. Our shareholders invest based on confidence in leadership that maintains appropriate professional standards." The implicit racism and classism in his words hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the atmosphere with assumptions about worth and value that I'd spent my entire adult life unconsciously accepting. Around the table, I could see other board members nodding thoughtfully, as if Blackstone's concerns were reasonable rather than reprehensible. "Are you suggesting," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "that my choice of friends reflects poorly on this company?" "I'm suggesting that perception matters in business," Blackstone replied smoothly. "The image of our CEO spending time in working-class neighborhoods, forming attachments to service workers and their children, sends a message about priorities that might concern our stakeholders." The word attachments was delivered with particular venom, as if caring about people was a character flaw rather than a human strength. I thought about Sophia's drawings on Marcus's refrigerator, about the way her face lit up when she saw me, about the genuine warmth that had begun to thaw the ice around my heart that I'd thought was permanent. "Furthermore," Blackstone continued, There are questions about financial irregularities, anonymous payments to music academies, unauthorized charitable contributions, expense reports that don't align with documented business activities. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that company resources are being used appropriately. The trap had been set with corporate precision. Every detail of my secret assistance to Sophia and Marcus documented and presented as evidence of poor judgment or possible financial misconduct. What I'd thought of as private generosity had been twisted into corporate malfeasance. My attempts to help a deserving child transformed into ammunition for a power struggle I hadn't even realized I was fighting. The discussion that followed was brutal in its clinical efficiency. Board members who'd praised my leadership for years suddenly found reasons to question my decision-making, my priorities, my fitness to represent a company built on innovation and excellence. The financial success that had previously silenced all criticism was dismissed as irrelevant compared to the potential damage that my personal choices might inflict on the company's reputation. As I sat listening to colleagues dissect my character and motivations with the same detachment they might bring to analyzing a failed product launch, I realized that this moment had been inevitable from the day I'd first knelt down to speak with Sophia in my lobby. Two worlds that were never meant to intersect had collided, and the corporate machinery was working exactly as designed to eliminate anything that didn't fit its narrow definition of acceptable behavior. The meeting ended with what Blackstone termed a friendly recommendation that I reconsider my recent associations and focus my attention on activities more befitting someone in my position. The threat was delivered with smiles and handshakes, couched in language about protecting the company's interests and maintaining shareholder confidence, but the message was crystal clear. Choose between the life I'd built and the family I'd found, between corporate success and personal happiness, between the safety of isolation and the risk of genuine human connection. As I walked back to my office after the meeting, passing the photographs of my professional achievements that lined the hallway, I felt the weight of a decision that would define not just my future but the kind of person I was willing to be. The elevator that had carried Sophia and Marcus to my penthouse just weeks earlier now felt like a transport between two different universes, each demanding absolute loyalty and offering no possibility of compromise. The weight of the board's ultimatum pressed down on me like a physical force as I stood at my office window, watching the ant-like figures of people moving through the streets below. From this height, everything looked manageable, controllable, reduced to simple patterns of movement that made sense from a distance. But I knew that down there, in those streets where Sophia played and Marcus worked, life was messy and complicated and beautiful in ways that quarterly reports could never capture. My assistant knocked and entered with the afternoon's priority items, her efficient manner unchanged despite the corporate storm that was undoubtedly already spreading through the building's corridors. News traveled fast in environments like Harrison Technologies, where every conversation was potential intelligence and every decision had implications that rippled through hundreds of jobs and millions in revenue. Mr. Harrison, you have the Pemberton Group conference call at 3, followed by the Japanese market analysis review. Your 7 o'clock dinner meeting with the Venture Capital Consortium has been confirmed. She paused, consulting her tablet with the practiced precision that had made her invaluable to my operation. Also, there's a Marcus Rodriguez in the lobby asking to see you. Security wasn't sure whether to send him up. My heart clenched at hearing his name, knowing instinctively that this visit wasn't social. The timing was too convenient, coming mere hours after Blackstone's corporate ambush. Someone had reached out to Marcus, fed him information designed to make him understand the impossible position our friendship had created. The corporate machine was already working to solve the problem of our connection by eliminating it at its source. Send him up, I said, though every professional instinct warned me that this conversation would only make an already complex situation worse. Marcus entered my office with the controlled composure of a man who'd had time to think through what he wanted to say. Gone was the easy warmth that had characterized our recent interactions, replaced by a careful distance that spoke of difficult realizations and painful decisions. He wore his best shirt, pressed but showing its age, and carried himself with the dignity of someone who'd learned to navigate conversations with people who held power over his life. Jude, he said, using my first name but without the comfortable familiarity it had carried during our dinners together. I think we need to talk. I gestured toward the seating area away from my desk, hoping to maintain some semblance of the friendship that had been developing between us. But Marcus remained standing, his posture suggesting that this would be a brief conversation with predetermined conclusions. I got a call this morning, he began, his voice carefully controlled. From someone who claimed to be looking out for Sophia's best interests. They explained some things about your situation here, about the position you're in because of us. The clinical precision of corporate manipulation was evident in every word he spoke. Someone, probably acting on Blackstone's instructions, had contacted Marcus with just enough information to make him understand the consequences of our continued association. They'd presented it as concern for Sophia's welfare, framing our friendship as a liability that could damage both our lives if it continued. Marcus, whatever they told you. They told me the truth, he interrupted, his brown eyes meeting mine with steady determination. They told me that your board questions your judgment because you've been spending time with people like us. They told me that your position as CEO could be at risk if you don't focus on what they consider appropriate relationships. The words hung between us like a barrier, each one carefully chosen to create maximum distance. Marcus had processed the information he'd received and reached conclusions that prioritized protection over possibility, safety over the uncertain promise of what we'd been building together. They also told me about the music lessons, he continued, and I saw something shift in his expression. About the anonymous scholarship that perfectly covered Sophia's piano instruction with one of the city's most expensive teachers. About how that scholarship appeared right after we met you. I felt heat rise in my face, caught between embarrassment at being discovered and frustration that my attempt to help had been twisted into something manipulative. The gifts I'd given secretly, hoping to avoid creating obligation or discomfort, had been exposed and reframed as evidence of the kind of patronizing charity that reinforced, rather than bridged the gap between our worlds. I never wanted you to feel obligated, I said, the words sounding inadequate even to my own ears. Sophia deserves those opportunities. Her talent isn't your responsibility, Marcus said firmly. I'm her father, taking care of her, providing for her, making sure she gets what she needs. That's my job, not yours. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. The fierce independence of a man who'd learned that accepting help often came with strings attached that could strangle the very thing you were trying to protect. He'd spent years building a life for Sophia, through his own effort and sacrifice, and my well-intentioned interference had undermined that accomplishment in ways I was only beginning to understand. You don't understand what it's like, he continued, his careful composure beginning to crack. To work 3 jobs and still worry about whether you can afford your daughter's school supplies. To see other kids with things you can't provide and wonder if you're failing her. To have people look at you like you're less important because of where you live or what you do for work. His words cut deeper than any corporate criticism because they revealed truths about the world that my privilege had protected me from seeing. I'd thought I was helping, but I'd been operating from a position of assumed superiority that made my assistance feel like charity rather than friendship. And then, someone like you comes along, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. Someone who can solve problems with money that I have been struggling with for years. Someone who can give Sophia opportunities that I'll never be able to afford. And for a minute, I let myself believe that maybe we could be friends, that maybe the differences between our worlds didn't matter. The pain in his voice was evident, the disappointment of someone who'd allowed himself to hope for something that had proven to be an illusion. He'd opened his life to me, shared his daughter's affection, believed that genuine connection could exist across the vast economic divide that separated our daily realities. But they don't let people like you stay friends with people like me, he said with bitter clarity. Your world has rules, and one of those rules is that you don't mix with working people unless it's for business or charity or some other transaction that keeps everyone in their proper place. I wanted to argue, to insist that he was wrong, that I could choose my own friends regardless of what the board or anyone else thought. But even as the protests formed in my mind, I knew he was right. The corporate structure that had given me wealth and power demanded conformity to social expectations that excluded genuine relationships across class lines. Sophia asks about you every day, Marcus said, and for the first time his voice wavered slightly. She drew you another picture for your office. She's been practicing piano pieces she wants to play for you. She doesn't understand why the nice man who showed her his beautiful apartment doesn't come to dinner anymore. The image of Sophia waiting for me, preparing gifts and performances for someone who might never return to her life was almost unbearable. I thought about her honey-colored eyes filled with trust, her small hand in mine as we walked through her neighborhood, her infectious laughter when I taught, her simple melodies on my piano. I have to protect her, Marcus said, his voice growing firm again. I have to protect her from getting too attached to someone who might not be able to stay in her life. I have to protect her from learning that some people matter more than others, that friendship depends on having the right address or the right job. He paused, looking around my office with its expensive furnishings and panoramic views. Most of all, I have to protect her from finding out that the world isn't as fair or kind as she believes it is. She still thinks that good people get good things, that working hard is enough, that everyone deserves to be happy. I want her to keep believing that as long as possible. The wisdom in his words revealed the depth of his love for Sophia and the impossible position that our friendship had created for him. By caring about us, I'd inadvertently introduced complications into their lives that threatened the very innocence and security he'd worked so hard to preserve. "So this is goodbye," he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake that would mark the end of what had briefly been the most meaningful relationship in my adult life. "Thank you for the kindness you showed us. Sophia will remember meeting you forever, and that's enough." I took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work and genuine effort, knowing that this moment would haunt me for years to come. We were two men who'd found unexpected friendship across impossible odds, only to discover that some barriers were too entrenched to overcome. "Tell her," I said, my voice barely steady. "Tell her that knowing her made me remember what's really important in life." Marcus nodded once and walked toward the door, his steps echoing in the silence that had settled over my office like a shroud. He paused at the threshold, not looking back, and said quietly, "I hope you figure out a way to keep that memory alive, Jude. I hope you don't let them make you forget." After he left, I stood alone in my office, surrounded by all the symbols of my success, feeling more isolated than I had in years. The city spread out below my windows, millions of people living their lives in communities I'd never be allowed to join, pursuing happiness in ways that corporate success had taught me to dismiss as insufficient. The afternoon meetings proceeded with mechanical efficiency, my body going through the motions of executive leadership, while my mind replayed every moment of the conversation with Marcus. The Japanese market analysis blurred into revenue projections. The venture capital dinner became a haze of strategic discussions that felt increasingly meaningless. That evening, I returned to my penthouse and walked directly to the piano where Sophia had sat just weeks earlier, her small fingers exploring keys that might unlock melodies she'd never heard before. The bench still held the impression of where she'd perched, eager and curious and completely unaware that her presence in my life would force me to confront everything I'd become and everything I'd lost in the pursuit of professional achievement. I played the simple melody I'd taught her, each note ringing through the empty apartment like an echo of possibilities that had been foreclosed by circumstances beyond any of our control. The music that had briefly connected three unlikely souls now served as a reminder of the price that maintaining my position required, the sacrifices that success demanded from everyone it touched. Outside my windows, Chicago glittered with the lights of millions of lives I'd never touched, families gathering for dinner, children being tucked into bed with stories and songs, people finding joy and meaning in connections that didn't require board approval or stakeholder validation. Somewhere in those lights, Sophia was probably asking her father when Mr. Jude would come visit again, and Marcus was searching for words to explain why some friendships weren't allowed to survive in a world that valued profit over people. The greatest tragedy wasn't just losing them from my life, but understanding that the system I'd mastered so completely was designed to prevent exactly the kind of authentic human connection that had made me feel alive for the first time in years. 6 months after that devastating goodbye in my office, I stood in the community center on Chicago's South Side, watching Sophia perform at her first public recital. She wore a simple blue dress that Marcus had carefully pressed, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon that caught the stage lights as she positioned her small hands over the keyboard of an old upright piano that had seen better decades but still held its tune. The audience was filled with families from the neighborhood, parents and grandparents who'd saved money and rearranged work schedules to attend this celebration of their children's musical achievements. I sat in the back row, having learned about the recital through the community foundation I'd quietly established after resigning from Harrison Technologies. When Sophia began to play, the simple melody that emerged was the same one I'd taught her in my penthouse, but transformed by months of practice and genuine passion into something far more beautiful than I'd ever imagined possible. Her technique wasn't perfect, but her expression was pure joy, the kind of authentic happiness that no amount of money could purchase or corporate success could replicate. Marcus sat in the front row, his face glowing with pride as he watched his daughter share her gift with their community. The exhaustion that had marked his features during our friendship had been replaced by something lighter, the contentment of a father whose sacrifices had created exactly the kind of moment that made everything worthwhile. After the recital, I approached them carefully, uncertain of my welcome but unable to leave without acknowledging what I'd witnessed. Sophia spotted me first, her face lighting up with the unguarded delight that had always characterized her personality. "Mr. Jude, you came to hear me play!" She launched herself into my arms before Marcus could intervene, her small body warm and trusting against my chest. "Did you hear the song you taught me? I practiced it every single day." Over her head I met Marcus's eyes and saw a mixture of surprise, wariness, and something that might have been cautious hope. The months apart had changed us both, but the fundamental connection that had drawn us together remained intact beneath the complications that had forced us apart. "You were magnificent," I told Sophia, setting her down gently. "Your mama would be so proud of you." Marcus stepped forward, his handshake firm but no longer formal. "Jude, I heard about what you did, leaving the company. That couldn't have been easy." The choice to walk away from Harrison Technologies had cost me everything I'd spent 15 years building, but it had returned something infinitely more valuable, the ability to live according to my authentic values rather than corporate expectations. The Community Foundation had become my new purpose, focusing on music education and family support programs that honored the lessons Sophia and Marcus had taught me. "Some things are worth more than board positions," I said, watching Sophia demonstrate piano techniques to younger children who'd gathered around her with typical childhood curiosity. The conversation that followed was different from our painful goodbye months earlier. We spoke carefully but honestly about the future, about friendship that could exist on equal terms rather than charity disguised as connection. Marcus had been promoted to assistant manager at Rosa's Diner, his steady reliability finally receiving the recognition it deserved. Sophia continued to thrive in her neighborhood school while pursuing music through the Foundation's scholarship program. As we prepared to leave the community center, Sophia tugged on my sleeve with the directness that had first captured my attention in my corporate lobby. "Mr. Jude, Papa says you don't have a family to eat dinner with. Would you like to come home with us?" Rosa made extra tamales. The invitation was offered with the same generous spirit that had drawn me into their world months earlier, but now it came without the complications of corporate pressure or social expectations. I looked at Marcus, seeing acceptance in his expression that hadn't been possible when my presence threatened their security. "I would love that very much," I said, taking Sophia's offered hand as we walked out into the Chicago evening. The lights of the city spread around us as we made our way through streets that no longer represented different worlds, but simply different neighborhoods in the same community. Sophia chattered excitedly about her performance, while Marcus and I discussed plans for expanding the Foundation's reach, our conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of genuine partnership. In my penthouse, I thought success meant reaching heights where others looked small and distant. But walking through these streets with Sophia's small hand in mine and Marcus's friendship freely given, I understood that true achievement was measured by the depth of connection rather than the accumulation of wealth. The greatest puzzle I'd ever solved wasn't a business problem or strategic challenge, but the mystery of what it meant to be genuinely happy. The answer hadn't been found in boardrooms or financial statements, but in the laughter of a 6-year-old girl who'd wished for a daddy and somehow helped a lost billionaire remember how to be human. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.